Bom dia, pessoal. A gente está aqui hoje para falar um pouco sobre a importância da diversidade na governança. Então, vou convidar os nossos convidados aqui a se apresentarem. A gente está aqui com a Caterine Wiener, do Goldman Sachs, com a Christina Miliamine, do MSCI, e com o Rafael Tovar, da AXA. E eles vão falar um pouquinho como que é a questão de governança na empresa que eles trabalham, que estão representando aqui. Então, vou convidá-los a se apresentar. Hi, everyone. Good morning and welcome. Thank you for being here. I would like to ask you to introduce yourselves and the company you're representing. So if you could please start, Catherine, and if you could just give a small spoiler about how your company considers the ESG factors in your business.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Just by way of background, I'm Catherine Winner. I serve as the Global Head of Stewardship at Goldman Sachs Asset Management, GSAM. GSAM, we have a very large and global footprint. We manage $1.8 trillion in assets under supervision. We have over 700 investment professionals located around the globe, which really enables us to provide our clients with investment and advisory solutions that span across asset classes, industries, and geographies. In terms of my role at GSAM, our global stewardship team serves as a dedicated resource to GSAM's investment teams. We oversee several key program areas, but I'll just focus on engagement and proxy voting for today's session. Regarding our proxy voting activities, we voted approximately 10,000 company meetings every year across 100,000 voting proposals, the large volume of data. To guide our voting decisions, we have a global proxy voting policy, and which is really reflective of GSAM's belief that sound corporate governance will create a framework within which a company can manage in its interest of its shareholders. Our policies are generally reviewed and updated on at least an annual basis, and this recent update just took place this month, which I'm happy to talk to you about our new policies. Taking into consideration local market best practices, our investment team's considerations, and industry trends. Proxy voting really provides us as long-term investors with an opportunity to express our views directly to management. And we can do that both through our public voting records and also by engaging directly with a company. So a little bit about engagement. We conduct direct company engagement with our portfolios that are focused on proactive outcomes-based engagement. So in terms of I'm sorry, my computer's going to die. So in terms of how we consider ESG, while also promoting good corporate governance practices, our engagement activities are grounded in a one Goldman Sachs approach. And really the two pillars of one, accelerating the climate transition, and second, advancing inclusive growth, which I'm happy to talk to you about today.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Christina, if you could please just introduce yourself and MSCI.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for having me here. Thank you for joining us today. So my name is Christina Miliamine. I'm a member of MSCI ESG research team. I am based in Toronto, Canada, and my research is primarily focused on corporate governance and diversity. Now, as many of you know, MSCI is a leading provider of data, research, and tools that are designed to help investors make better investment decisions. So our team, our ESG research team, is committed to providing reliable and relevant data, as well as actionable insights, so investors can better understand how companies are positioning themselves in the context of environmental, social, governance, and climate risk and opportunities. MSCI is committed in providing innovative solutions and services that help investors that are incorporating ESG and climate considerations into their investment decision process. Now, MSCI is also committed to operate sustainably. So to that end, we have established an environmental policy. We have improved transparency through the CDP and the TCFD report. And we have publicly committed to carbon emission target reductions. Now, in the context of diversity, which is the topic of today, I think it's fair to say that MSCI has both a top-down and a bottom-up approach that complement each other, that reinforce each other. And what I mean by that is that from the top, we have a commitment from our senior leaders to embrace diversity and to promote diversity, both within the company and to our stakeholders. And what I mean by that, just to give some examples of how these translate into actions, is that MSCI has incorporated an executive diversity council that promotes diversity by providing ongoing advice to different corporate initiatives. Our leaders also sponsor and support diverse-related talent acquisition and leadership development programs. We also have an annual diversity, equity, and inclusion summit. And in 2020, MSCI rolled out unconscious bias training throughout the company, including our leadership. Now, all of that sets the tone. All of that creates a framework, but these initiatives, they're also complemented by a lot of other initiatives that are either led to or established in collaboration with our employee resource groups. So these initiatives range from education to candid conversations about topics that are really important to employees, such as racial injustice.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Christina. I think all these topics are very useful and important to us. Rafael, welcome. Please, if you could just introduce yourself and your company and talk a little bit about your ESG practices.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. And thanks, my fellow panelists and you guys at XP for it's really surprising and fulfilling to see that these topics are relevant in Latin America. It's a great step forward, and I'm really proud, to be a part of these, initiative. Well, just to introduce myself, so my name is Rafael Tovar. I'm responsible for the development of a retail business in the Americas. But I really, have historically gravitated to sustainable investments, just like many others have done it. I think through caring about climate change. As an engineer, I started my career as a technology consultant, and this, was the easiest step towards sustainability, right? When in our company, and I see myself in a career, we've come to see that actually human capital is really the key for corporate success. We see that, the world is changing. We're living a profound transformation in our society, and really innovation is the engine for growth. And human capital, where we see, diversity, inclusion, equality are really key pillars for that development. And the companies that are able to attract the talent, to retain the talent, and develop the talent are the ones that we see will derive value in the long term. So from an investment point of view and a philosophical point of view, as an investor, as an asset manager, what we care about is to achieve, long-term prosperity for our clients and to improve our society and our world, So how can we align that or reconcile that in such an imperfect world that we're living in, right? And that's so as you see in the past, as I said, that now I'm proud this is a relevant topic, but in the past, we were really dismissed as hippies, actually, socialists, right? And how can we really come to the forefront of a corporate development, of attractive investment returns, and a better world, right? And so when you look at the world, we really see pretty much about 10,000 companies that we track. Thanks a lot to MSCI, which is one of the key partners that we use to analyze data. And we really see that when you look at these metrics of climate change and human capital, you really reduce the scope of universe to really from 10,000 to maybe 1,000 companies that we really think thrive, in several of these metrics to a degree that we think aligns with our mission, right? And so, but to be honest, really, when we look at our portfolios, most of our equity portfolios have 40 to 60 investments, right? So that's it. We only need 40, 60, maybe 200 companies that really excel in these categories. And that is I think it's really pragmatic, right? So we live in a diverse world. Why shouldn't companies be diverse themselves, right? And so can they align themselves with our customers? And in the long term, we really think that derives value. So I think it's naive to think that there are not enough of those companies, and we think that we can find those. You know, not all mandates are sustainable, nor all mandates are ESG, but definitely the trajectory that we see in the world, in governments that are caring more, people are caring more, consumers are empowered, is where we see, you know, that the stars are aligned, and that's, I think, is how we look at ESG from a very pragmatic point of view. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I think this consumer perspective is very important also. I would like to ask you, and I would like to start with Christina, because she already brought it up about the importance of diversity coming bottom up and top bottom. So I'd like to ask you, how do you see, and what is the importance of different corporate diversity in different corporate levels? Do you believe a balanced board is important for corporate governance? And would you say diversity actually improves performance, company performance? So I'd like to ask you to give your point of view about this.
Absolutely. I think there is an ever-growing body of research that has demonstrated over and over again all the benefits of diversity, and there is still only scratching the surface. There is still more benefits to be uncovered. Here at MSCI, we have been reporting at gender diversity at board level since 2009. And we have published a range of reports demonstrates the benefits of diversity. Just to give you some examples, in 2016, we published the Tipping Point report. And for that report, what we did, we looked at board gender diversity, and we want to see which were the companies that have reached a critical mass of female directors, which is defined as having at least 3 women on board. And what we found out was that companies that have reached these critical mass of female directors actually experience better financial performance, both in terms of return on equity and in terms of earnings per share. Now, just this week, in commemoration of the International Women's Day, we published a blog that went one step ahead. So in addition to look at companies that have reached the critical mass of female directors, we also wanted to see which were the companies that were able to sustain the level of diversity for at least 3 years, what we defined as companies that had sustained board diversity. And what we realized is that among the companies with sustained board diversity, meaning companies that have had at least 3 female directors with tenures of at least 3 years, they were more likely to be ESG leaders than their peers. And the driver of these results were actually the environmental strengths and the environment performance of these companies. Now, none of these reports can prove causation, but they do provide some important insights on the benefits of diversity. And we actually, in addition to look at it from a board perspective, we also look at it from a talent management perspective, as Rafael has mentioned before, because I think it's really interesting that more often than not, when we are talking about diversity, we see talks about these being a constraint or a way of narrowing the pool of candidates, and it's actually quite the opposite. So when we add the lens of diversity to the analysis, we are expanding the pool of candidates. So last year, we decided to look at US zip code level demographic data to understand what was the pool of talent that was available to companies in the US. Then we looked at the company's voluntary disclosure data on diversity especially the racial diversity data disclosed by the US companies voluntarily, and compare it with the demographic data that was available for the regions where these companies operated. And what we found out was that companies were not making full use of the talent pool available to them. Minorities were not being hired proportionally to their representation on those locations. And the numbers were much worse when we think about senior management level. And these three are only a few examples of the body of research that is out there that is not only published by MSCI. There are a lot of market participants that have published similar research showing the benefit of diversity and the different ways that diversity can benefit a company. So I personally think that yes, it's really important that we are talking about diversity and why it's important. And I think there is an educational process that has to happen. And I think this was part of it. But I'm personally looking forward to kind of moving the focus from why diversity is important to how can we get there. Thank you.
Perfect, Christina. Thank you so much. I agree with you. We need to go to the action side. I'd like to ask Rafael to complement your answer and put his point of view, please.
Yes, so as I mentioned, it's really, if our society is diverse, as I mentioned, why companies shouldn't be, right? And I think it's really one of the pitfalls of society, right? It's really that we've grown in a world with a lot of groupthink, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with the term groupthink, right? But it's pretty much a way of the people being siloed to what they believe, what they like, what they're familiar with, and this really has perpetuated and exacerbated, a lot of the unconscious biases and the systemic discrimination, for gender diversity and affected really equality, right? And we see that, just to give you an example, right? So 73% of the spending of households is actually done by women, right? If you look at pretty much along with the same line that Christina was talking about, right? 35% of men between 24 and 34 years old, millennials, right, have college degrees, where we're really 46% of women do, right? So there's a really greater and better or more educated pool of talent out there, and this is really not really being represented in companies, right? And so if you look at especially like in technology companies where we really get data since maybe 2014, right? We've seen that yes, in some degree, women representation has improved, but racial representation has not, and cultural representation has really not improved. So how can we align all these things, and the trajectory is really important, right? And so I think that the opposite of groupthink is this diverse, heterogeneous thinking, and it's really what we can do as investors and society to really help companies to go into that, right? And I think companies that don't do that in the long term would not prevail. So that's kind of the way we look at this. It is really important for board diversity, not only at the board, which is really key. So it's again, so if you look at the way we look at it, it's not having 3 women on board, for example, but having 30% of the board diverse, right? In developed companies, in developed countries, you really reduce those 10,000 companies to less than 1,000, right? So it's really key how lacking and this is, and it surprises us that this is even a question, but it is a society that we're living in. So hopefully things will get better. I think they are, but we're far from where we should be. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I agree. We're far from where we want to be, but we're getting there. I believe we're getting there. Catherine, could you please tell us a little bit about your initiatives regarding women in board and diversity in board and different corporate levels?
Sure. So this is all about how do we action this problem, right? So at GSAM, we really believe that diverse teams have the potential to outperform. That's how we approach diversity. We promote and encourage gender diversity throughout the entire investment process. So from the makeup of our own investment teams to the leadership and the board of our portfolio companies. For example, in our fundamental equity business within GSAM, nearly half of the $80 billion that is entrusted to us by our clients is managed by female investors. Given our views on diversity, our stewardship team really seeks to promote diversity through our proxy voting activities and our engagement efforts. So for last year's voting season, which was in 2020, we updated our proxy voting policy and voted against all members of a nominating committee at any company around the world that did not have at least one female director. So from March of 2019 through the end of June of 2020, GSAM voted against 888 companies around the world for lacking a female at the board level. We last checked at the beginning of this month, 23% of those companies that we voted against have added at least one woman. So while we're seeing a rate of change, I think it's moving at a little bit of a glacial pace, to be honest. So therefore, beginning of March of this year, we've escalated our current gender policy, and we're now voting against the entire board of any company in the US that does not have at least one female director. And we will continue to vote against the nominating committees of any company globally that does not have at least one woman. To the comments made around, other forms of diversity, I think that's very important. So while we've recognized that we have made some progress here on the gender front, we really do need to do more in terms of other diversity, particularly around race and ethnicity. So beginning this month also, in an action that we're taking, we've updated our US policy again and are voting against the entire nominating committee of any company where there's not at least one female director and one other diverse director. And diversity in this case will define it as to include gender, race, ethnicity, as well as sexual orientation. This is really important for messaging across the firm. It's consistent with our broader Goldman Sachs approach to diversity. I talked about the inclusive growth pillar in my opening comments. Particularly in our investment banking division, we have a policy that we will only take companies public if the company has at least 2 diverse directors in the US and Europe. The policy is also just for the US at this point, but we are continuing to evolve our approach and looking to how we can expand our definition of diversity across the globe. Definitions can be difficult to deal with, and so we want to be able to execute upon a policy that's very thoughtful. I will say that engaging on diversity can provide a lot of valuable insights. So part of the work that we do is engaging directly with companies, as I mentioned. We've heard from companies, and the feedback that we've received from companies is that sometimes identifying qualified candidates is challenging. Now, we all know that there are many, many qualified people out there to serve on boards, but that is the feedback that we've received. So we want to create a solution to this problem. We are long-term shareholders. We want to partner with the companies that we're invested in. So now we work with our broader banking division and our colleagues in the banking division to tap into their network of board qualified women and candidates. And we can offer those candidates to companies that we're engaging with to help bring qualified women into their recruitment process. So these are just some of the actions that we're taking within GSAM to help promote diversity, both at the board and hopefully down through the workforce as well, as which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Great, thank you. That's a very nice initiative. I think we all need to actually help each other get there faster. So I'd like to, in this spirit, I'd like to ask you, what advice would you give to companies that are starting their path on a more diverse body, and how can they, what can they do to get there faster, and what initiatives, what do you recommend they do to improve their diversity initiatives? Rafael, if you could please start.
Sure. I think it's really a two-pronged message. So the first message is, really embrace human capital. Right? So that, I think that's the key message. Is it's really probably the most valuable asset as a company you have, right? So as you see, as I mentioned, in this profound transformation that we see in the world, that steel mill, that oil field, that oil factory, it's very hard to pinpoint value to that, right? And so all you can see is just develop, grow the talent that you have, and that is what will leave you and make you different for innovation. You can really pinpoint a value to talent, right? And it's really hard to get, right? And so that's what we're really convinced that is a key to performance. Again, don't think about just having sustainability in your mission statement is good enough, right? Because if you don't believe it, if you don't walk the talk, you're really doing nothing, right? And so that's I think it's the first part of the message, right? And secondly, for us as investors, right? As if you as a corporate leader, you are interested in getting our money, right, or the money from our clients. It's really that and this is aligns with the data that we get, right? So it's really hard to improve something that you don't measure, right? And it's really hard for us as investors to track the level of the inclusion or diversity or sustainability that is involved in this company's management if we are not able to see it and track it, right? And so really improve transparency, disclose more, let us know what you're doing. We want to hear the message from the top, but we also want to see, not only in the board, but what is your workforce composed of? What is the percentages across business lines of several levels of diversity? What you're doing in terms of inclusion? What you're doing in terms of just basic policies to make your people happier and to stay there, right? Retention, promotion, daycare, all those things are key for us to track. And if we don't put it out there, we cannot see it. And if we cannot see it, we will not invest in you. So those are the things that embrace human capital and disclose is, I think, what we need right now.
Perfect. Catherine, you already talked a little bit about how you guys help other companies, but I would like to ask you for some advice for those who are starting on this journey.
Yeah, we give a lot of feedback in our engagement, so happy to talk about that. So really, I'll echo my colleagues. Disclosure is key. If you cannot measure it, you can't monitor it. I know disclosure in this area can be sensitive. There's a lot of personal information that we're asking for, and so we're aware of sensitivities around that. But it's how you disclose information that investors are seeking is really important. So as long-term investors at GSAM, we're really focused on long-term performance. I said it before, but board level diversity has been part of the conversation for several years now, with investors, including GSAM, as well as other regulatory groups pushing for different, forms of diversity and different frameworks in terms of how to disclose diversity. So, we're aligned there. The conversation is expanding now to consider diversity, but beyond the board, though. So how do you disclose your workforce diversity as well? So at GSAM, we're increasing our efforts to engage with companies to better disclose the disclosure of workforce demographics. And so as investors, we are encouraging companies to disclose more information on not only just their board and workforce demographics, so we can better measure and monitor, but we also want to engage with them on ways that we are able to use this information in comparable ways, right? So all the disclosures can vary across different companies, particularly across different sectors as well. But we really do believe that the increased disclosure can enable us to seek out and align our stewardship policies with improved racial equity in the future. So some examples of the conversations that we're having with companies, we are seeing some positive trends. So with a number of companies, we're seeing them committing to disclosing more detailed D&I data. We're seeing companies that are setting diversity targets. And in some cases, they're even tying these diversity targets to their compensation. We're seeing companies establish the roles of a chief diversity officer that can oversee D&I initiatives. And we're also seeing companies adopting requirements that diverse candidates have to be considered for senior management in their recruiting efforts. So overall, the advice that I would give is that really advocating for disclosure on this type of information will really help us as investors make better investment decisions on behalf of our clients, but can also help us, like I said, measure and monitor progress over time. And we understand that we have a ways to go, but like I said earlier, we're partners with the companies that we're invested in. We really want them to succeed and really believe that this provides long-term value over time. So, again, it's a partnership with them, and we really advocate for future and improved disclosure.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Christina, if you could give your advice, your take on this.
Absolutely. I obviously echo what my colleagues have said. Transparency is definitely top priority. I want to add 3 advice that I thought about that I think can help. So first, don't let the fear of not getting perfectly from the get-going paralyze you. Diversity is complex. There are different lenses through it you can assess diversity. Not all concepts are applicable universally. You have to account for the context, for the local context, for the company's context. So it can be a little bit overwhelming, but diversity is a journey. So it is less about where you are in the journey and more about how you're progressing. So, and as Rafael has mentioned before, the universe of companies that are actually performing really well in the context of diversity is quite small. But what we're starting to see is some leadership, not necessarily because the companies are already performing really well in terms of diversity, but because they're committed to. And what I mean by committed is not the statement that we are committed to improve diversity. We are seeing companies that are willing to disclose more granular information in terms of diversity. We are seeing companies that are reviewing their policies and procedures to uncover bias. They are doing pay gap analysis and corrected them. They are establishing targets either at board, senior management, or workforce level. And these are the companies they are setting the way. These are the companies they are taking leadership in terms of diversity. My second advice is to challenge assumptions. Catherine mentioned before that one of the most common arguments to justify limited or no female representation at board level is the lack of qualified women directors. So in 2019, we tested it. So we looked at qualifications from 2 angles. We look at risk expertise and financial expertise. So from a risk expertise, we didn't find any difference, any significant difference between male directors and female directors. But from a financial perspective, in emerging markets, female directors were actually more likely to have financial expertise than their male peers. So if you think about that, companies that had a higher female representation board level were not only potentially benefiting from diversity, from gender diversity in that case, but they were also more likely to have a financial expertise among their directors. And if you flip it, companies that have all male boards or a limited female representation not only were missing out on the benefits of diversity, but they were less likely to have financial expertise at board level. And my last advice is don't let diversity take the backseat. I think that it's easy and sometimes even appealing, especially for a company that's struggling with diversity, to kind of push back and blame on other priorities, especially now that we are living in a pandemic. But if you read through the research that is out there, and if you trust the data that is out there, you see that diversity has been linked to innovation, to better governance oversight, to better decision-making, even to better performance. So I would say that there is no better time to focus on diversity than now.
Great, thank you. Catherine, you were talking a little bit about data disclosure, and I would like to ask you your point of view about the regulations or self-regulations perspective. What do you think it's best? And for companies that do not disclose, how do you access the company's information about gender diversity and other D&I policies?
Sure.
Practices,
Yeah, sure. So we advocate for companies to disclose data according to market best practices. and accepted investor frameworks such as SASB, which is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. We vote and invest in over 71 different markets. Diversity is defined differently across those regions. We understand that it's not going to be as easily comparable as we would like. So we're trying to find, ways as investors to have comparable information. So using frameworks such as SASB to identify material metrics that are material to that company's business is an easier way for us to be able to compare data across different geographies. To advocate for that, engagement is really key here. So we are engaging directly with companies in our portfolio who may have, limited or no disclosure. And we really want to understand, first and foremost, a company's commitment to expanding disclosure. Understanding that small cap companies might have more resourcing constraints than a large cap company in terms of being able to disclose this type of information that we're seeking. We also want to understand a company's progress that they're making. If you don't disclose what you're doing, it's hard for us to know that you're even attempting to disclose or making any progress. So just by having a dialogue to understand where are you right now in your journey of disclosure and commitments to improvement. And then third, which I think has come out in this conversation, is really understanding the challenges that companies are facing, in the types of disclosure and identifying and tackling diversity challenges. I think that through that dialogue, it's really powerful and we gain a lot of insight. So, we can discuss the challenges, like I said, it's a lot of regional differences that we want to take into account. We are global investors. There's different privacy regulations that we want to be assured that we are respectful of. And then really defining diversity across different regions is a challenge too. In terms of broader board diversity, we mentioned the challenge and repeated, and my colleagues have repeated again, of not being able to find qualified candidates, which, again, I mentioned the partnership that we do with our investment banking division to really, as quote unquote, a matchmaking service, just being able to network better. And because a lot of recruitment happens, in the same circles, right? So we're seeing a lot of board candidates just being recycled and not expanding. And it's really about expanding a pipeline. And so again, we want to partner with our investment banking division, who has a very vast network across the globe, to be able to provide qualified candidates to the companies that are seeking additional diversity. Additionally, some companies that aren't disclosing diversity data, they've expressed that they don't feel comfortable doing, disclosing where they are, that the numbers aren't quite as good as what they would like them to be. We understand that we have a long way to go here, but we have to start somewhere. So we are advocating just for more transparency, encouraging engagement, because we'd like to understand a company's story and where they are in their journey. And just, it will help us be able to measure and monitor progress, and then also encourage accountability, because once it's disclosed, then we can hold companies accountable, but understand that there's quite a journey to go here.
Thank you so much. Christina, this impacts your work directly. So how do you feel, and what's your point of view on the data disclosure and regulation or self-regulation policies?
I think that regulation and self-regulations are tools in our toolbox. So they have the merits, they have the advantages and disadvantages. And I don't think there is one size fits all approach. I think we have to consider the context of the regulation itself and the context of the jurisdiction where the regulation is being implemented, right? But that said, I do want to give one anecdotal example of how having regulations can actually speed up the process. So in 2019, we decided to look at, for gender diversity, at companies that were domiciled in jurisdictions that had implemented mandatory quotas. So these are regulatory-driven quotas, right? Against companies that were domiciled in jurisdictions without this kind of requirement. And what we found out was that companies that were domiciled in jurisdictions with mandatory quotas not only have reached a higher level of gender diversity among their directors, but actually more than 50% have exceeded the quota requirements. So I think that example kind of helps the discussion about the benefits and the disadvantages as well of regulations. But you nailed it. Data is the core of what we do. We need data to provide meaningful insight to our clients. And differently from investors, we don't have the same engagement with companies to get this information. So all our analysis is based on publicly available information, right? So we are obviously supporters of more disclosure and standardized disclosure as well, because as has been mentioned by my colleagues before, comparability is key here, right? So standardized disclosures are needed too. But one thing that I want to mention is that MSCI, we have added alternative data, and we've been increasingly add alternative data to our analysis. And what we mean by that is any data related to the company or a macro data that can impact the company, but that is not disclosed by the company. So we are finding ways to kind of fill the gap when information is not available to the company. That won't replace the information that is disclosed by the company. We still need and will always need the company's commitment to improve transparency and to increase disclosure. But that is the alternative data that adds value and allow us to look at the data from different angles.
Thank you so much. Rafael, could you please put your point of view here about the regulation or self-regulation and data disclosure?
Yeah, I really echo the comments of Catherine and Christine. It's really engagement, right, and access to data that I think will drive this. There's really no. I think the world is evolving to a place where the consumers are empowered, right? Investors are empowered, right? And there's a lot that is going to be said just by the flow of capital from us to companies and to equity markets and corporate bond markets, right? And so this is going to drive not necessarily governments. We see the pressure. Regulatory pressures is starting to increase, but we think that it's going to come probably more from the markets themselves, from people themselves, really caring more about these issues, climate change, human capital, really becoming relevant discussions when people consider what they do with their money to invest, right? And so companies not only are going to follow governments that are actually, getting into that trajectory as well, but the flow of capital will also dictate a lot here. So I think it's really that, and the way that we can do that in a practical point of view, as Catherine mentioned, is really through engagement and engagement and asking companies to disclose. If they disclose, we can see what they're doing, their progress, and really I think that it's all arrows pointing into that direction.
Thank you so much. So we've been talking here for about 44 minutes, and we're coming to the end of our panel, unfortunately, because I could stay here a lot longer talking with you guys about this topic. But I'd like to thank you so much for being here and for your availability to discuss this topic and to help us educate our listeners. And I'd like to ask if anyone has any final consideration. There was still some topic that we could have discussed here, but about what are the biggest challenges to a more diverse environment. But I would like to ask you to just put your final considerations so we can finish here on time.
I can just jump in.
Christina, if you want to. Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Catherine.
Sorry, I'll just jump in quickly. Through the last year and as a response to the pandemic, it's really heightened the importance of human capital management and understanding it. It's a very complex issue for companies, but that sustainability is really not just about the environment anymore. It's also about long-term sustainability and how companies manage with their human capital management as well. So it's been, obviously COVID's been a challenge, but it has come it's seen as an opportunity as well. And there's a lot of silver lining here, I think, in terms of diversity as a result of the pandemic.
I would just close really quickly, re-emphasize something that has been mentioned before, that is transparency and accountability. As we said, sorry, what gets measured get done, and we can only measure anything, if we have the underlying data, right? So I think if we want to progress, the key here is increased transparency and increase accountability.
Perfect. And so just conclude with, there are a lot of unconscious biases and cultural barriers and many things and perceptions that we need to overcome. As Catherine mentioned, it's very different if we are here, like I'm here in New York, right? And the company's in the US, or it's very different if you're in Asia or in Latin America, right? And, the composition of board, the cultural barriers, the way people are raised, it's really key. But what we think that is, if we can overcome many of those biases, which are, very most commonly unconscious, we need to continue, just raise awareness, educate people, educate companies, and really try to look into ourselves, and see how we can be better, right? And I think that can be aligned with prosperity, that can be aligned with a better society and a better world. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Christina. And thank you, Rafael, for being here and for talking to me and for opening up all of these initiatives you guys have. I hope the viewers enjoyed it all, and I hope to see you soon and to talk to you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.